Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to the Influential You podcast. My name is Josh D'Amigo, and I'm an Influential You consultant, senior program faculty member, and host of this weekly podcast. At Influential You, we teach you how to launch, grow, and scale your business and amplify your professional influence. Since 2009, we've helped thousands of business owners, executives, and entrepreneurs become more influential, more rewarded, and more you. Over the last 10 years of this podcast, we have built a collection of stories from individuals who found satisfaction through our advanced education and shared their stories through these interviews. This season, we've been revisiting some of these classic tales. We've shared original episodes of the Influential You podcast hosted by our CEO and co-founder, John Patterson, and I've shared some of the key takeaways that I've learned from re-listening to each of these interviews. Today, we'll revisit our first interview with Influential You client, Troy Frost. Released in August of 2016, this episode features John's interview with Troy Frost, where Troy shares what he learned about surrounding himself with other smart professionals. It wasn't something that threatened his future, but rather something that strengthened his future. Troy is a deep thinker, a wee bit skeptical, and almost too smart for his own good. And you'll hear more about how he learned to work past all of that thinking and honor his father's last lesson, to get wise. During this episode, you'll hear references to influence ecology, the original name for our organization, which is another way of saying you are the company you keep. And this is still a big part of what we teach to our clients and teams today. Enjoy this episode, and I'll see you on the other side.
Now, Troy's been a member with Influence Ecology for a little over 5 years. And Troy, welcome. Tell us a little bit about Syntegrity.
Well, Syntegrity's we're a mobile device security software company, and we specialize in something called behavioral biometrics. And for those of you who are familiar with biometrics, if you have a smartphone with a fingerprint scanner on it, when you put your finger up to the phone, it knows who you are based off of your fingerprint or your iris or your facial features or whatnot. We do that, but on a behavioral level. So we can measure with an extreme degree of accuracy who you are based off of how you use your device. So things like the angle that you hold it, the time of day that you access your data, even the electromagnetic fields that you frequently walk through throughout your day. All of that kind of combines together to create a unique picture of your behavior and how you use your device. And it's not something that I can steal from you like a password, and it's certainly something that I can't easily replicate.
That's fantastic. That sounds rather James Bond-like. And I gotta tell you that your autobiography reads like a movie character who simply doesn't fit in, and not because he's daft or ugly or clueless, but quite the opposite. The quote that you use in your autobiography is by Mark Twain: "I have never let my schooling interfere with my education."
Yep.
Tell us about that.
Well, I have never liked school. I just never really worked out very well for me. I was kind of a bit of an awkward kid. When I was younger, my teachers, there's one particular teacher that really kind of turned me off to your traditional academic processes. It was an English teacher, and I believe she was in sixth grade, seventh grade, something like that. But at the time, I was, this was in the 90s. I was a kid with baggy pants and bleached blonde hair, and not exactly the most studious person. But I did tend to gravitate towards math and science classes. I did very well, excelled, was in advanced placement in those courses. But I had one teacher who it was an English teacher, and she accused me of plagiarism. And I wrote this story. I was very proud of it. I don't remember exactly what the topic was, but I do remember putting an awful lot of work and effort into it. And she just kind of gaslighted me into believing that this wasn't mine. So I said, yeah, okay, I stole it. And ever since then, I've just dumbed down my assignments, because apparently I did not conform to my academic performance was not congruent with my appearance or behavior.
Yeah.
So I never really fit in school. I never really, even in college, when I went to college, I didn't really fit in there. I actually dropped out of high school. I never graduated high school. I I actually left to pursue a career in professional skateboarding, if you can believe that or not, which obviously didn't pan out. But I'm glad it didn't. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here today.
Absolutely. And on the note of your high school, I love the story in your autobiography about, you got to a point where you wanted to drop out of high school and, your parents said what?
Well, they said they were very, very reluctant to allow me to drop out of high school. They said the only way we're going to allow you to do that is if you get your GED, your general education degree, which is a high school equivalency. And I think they were thinking that this would be a more relaxed environment for me to pursue my own studies, and that I would, I'd take these adult classes with people who were older than me. And that was another thing, is when I was a kid, I hung out with people who were much older than me. Even to this day, I have a business partner who's in his late 60s. I consider him one of my closest friends. And so, of course, I agreed to that, and I had my own plan in my head. And the day that they signed the paper, I remember that very, very fondly. It was like I was free. And I think I mentioned in the autobiography that, I've never been arrested or incarcerated, but I imagined that being freed from prison was an awful lot like what it felt like when I was released from my high school requirements. So that same day, I skateboarded over to the Adult Education Center. And I kind of was met with a similar sort of disdain, because obviously I didn't look like I belonged there.
Yeah.
And they said, "Oh yeah, it's a lot harder to get your GED than it is to get your high school diploma. People graduate and they can't read. You got to take all these classes, and it's going to be so much harder." And I said, "Yeah. Just give me the damn test." So they gave me the test, and I aced it. That day, the day I dropped out of high school, I graduated, and I was a free man.
Amazing. That's amazing. So, since we're really here talking about your entrepreneurial journey, how does this early time shape who you become as an entrepreneur?
I think my parents had the most significant influence on me. They were both small business owners. My father was an ex-military guy who started a machine shop. He was a machinist down in Texas. And my mother was an aspiring architect. And she was so good at the time when she was younger. She was actually one of the first women in the United States to get an unsecured loan from the bank, a business loan, without needing a man as a co-signer. Of course, back in the 60s, that was unheard of. A woman getting a loan to start a business. That's crazy. But she did, and she was in a lot of magazines and whatnot. So the entrepreneurial spirit runs very deep in my family, and I was raised very differently. And I noticed this when I was a child too. I was raised very differently than my peers. I had so much more freedom than they did, and the only real requirements were for me to bring home good grades and don't bring home any kids. That was basically it. Everything else was fair game. And so I didn't never had a curfew. I think the way that they raised me had a significant impact. And they never told me no. So when I was a child, if I wanted something, it was, "What's your plan to raise the money?" And there's one event in particular that really instilled this sense of entrepreneurial spirit in me. When I was 13 years old, I had a wealthy friend named DJ. And my family, we were not well off at all. I mean, we were not middle class. We weren't starving, but we were by no means wealthy. And DJ, he had all the coolest toys. And one year when I was 13, his father bought him for his birthday a dirt bike, and we rode the wheels off of this thing all summer long. We found a junkyard area, and we'd build ramps and compete to see who could jump the longest and the highest. And that summer was a defining moment in my life, because when my birthday came around, of course, I went to my father and said, "Hey, Dad, can I have a dirt bike for my birthday?" And of course, at the time, that was completely outside of our means. He didn't tell me no. He said, "Sure. What's your plan to raise the money?"
Mm.
And I said, "What do you mean, what's my plan? My plan was to ask you." And he sat me down, and, you know, as an adult looking back at this, I think he was trying to reason with me at the time. We did the math, and he showed me, okay, this is, we inventory our skill sets. What can you do to make money? We settled on lawn care as a viable option, and then we figured out a price and showed me how to calculate my costs and overhead and what it would take. And I don't remember how many lawns it would have taken me to mow. It was some ridiculous number, like 500 lawns or something like that. And I think he was trying to show me through evidence that this was just beyond us. This is just something that we can't do. And I certainly did not take it that way. I immediately set out. From morning till night, that entire summer, I was, I think, 12 to 16 hours a day doing lawn care. And by the end of the summer, I had even hired some of my friends to help me in this endeavor. So I'd pay them like 50% of what I was bringing in, minus the overhead and all this sort of thing. And they thought it was great because I had more work than I could handle, and they were making money, and I was making money, and everything was great. So at the end of the summer, a 13-year-old kid in the 90s, I had amassed a small fortune of $1,000, which was quite a bit of money. It's still a lot of money to this day. But it was still not enough to purchase the dirt bike. It was about half of what it would take to buy the bike that I wanted. And I think that my parents were concerned that my new entrepreneurial venture might interfere with my schoolwork, because the fall was coming and we're going back to school, and I was already talking about raking leaves and shoveling snow and all this sort of thing. My dad said, "Okay, look, I'm gonna lend you the rest of the money to buy this bike, but you have to pay me back over time." And I said, "Oh, of course." So that day we went down to the Honda dealership. I remember like it was yesterday, riding in the back of my dad's Chrysler minivan. We had pulled the seats out so we could wheel the dirt bike in there. And on the way home, I remember the sense of accomplishment that I had. And I think that was the moment when I realized that if you want something bad enough and you're willing to work at it and put in your blood, sweat, tears into it, and honestly, elicit the help of the people around you, that pretty much anything that you want is attainable. And I earned that bike. DJ didn't earn his bike. And the next year, he was on to the next thing because his parents just gave him whatever he wanted. But I was still on that bike. That bike stayed with me for years. Now I own 5 motorcycles, but to this day, I'm still into motorcycles.
That's fantastic. Well, so you were 13 around that time, and you're how old now?
35.
35 years old. God, I'm jealous. All right, so 35 years old. So how come influence ecology?
Well, honestly, I was referred to influence ecology by a trusted friend. It was a good friend of mine said, "Hey, he was in the ecology, and his aunt was in the ecology." She referred him, and he said, "Hey, I think you should do this. This is, at the time I was already fairly successful. We were, I think, 4 years into level 9, so things were growing. I was admittedly extremely naive, especially about money. I really didn't know how to manage the money that I was making, so I just kind of blew it on everything. But he talked me into doing it, and I've been here ever since."
So how come? The reason I ask is because I keep going back to this quote about "I never let my schooling interfere with my education," and you're sort of, you're not a traditional guy. You're you don't follow the masses. You're a bit of a renegade in all kinds of ways, and a hacker and a skateboarder, all that kind of stuff, and a motorcycle. So, and here we are in this education. This is a very unique kind of education. We teach transactional competence. How come you're participating here, and how come transactional competence?
Well, I think for transactional competence, the thing that always pops into my mind when I think of why transactional competence is, I see it as a bit of a force multiplier. So for me, at least, it has helped me accelerate virtually every aspect of positive aspect of my life, and really helped me shed many of the negative aspects. Why influence ecology? I think, honestly, I really like the way that you guys teach. It's very much you're on your own. It's your responsibility. I've always believed your education is what you make it, and what you put into it. And I think the freedom that influence ecology allows to apply the concepts to your offer in your own way really appeals to me, because I've always been a bit of a try first, ask questions later kind of person. I know that's shocking to those of you who know me. But diving in head first into something and influence ecology creates an environment where that is not only encouraged but celebrated. And I think that's a very, very valuable thing. I think it's something that's missing from education, academia today. And I love the way you guys work.
That's great. And so if you think about people listening, the kinds of questions people often ask you about you and what you do and how you got to where you are. What are some of those questions, and what are your answers?
Well, a lot of people ask me about what it was like when I first struck out on my own, and seriously first struck out on my own. I always respond with, it was a catastrophic failure. It was absolutely total failure. I was at the time I had sustained, when I was 17 years old is when I started my first real company. I had suffered a career-ending injury to my right ankle at a skateboarding competition in Plymouth. And I was skating in the Pro-Am circuit, which is basically, it's sort of like a probationary period where you skate with professional skateboarders. It might, if any of you are aware, it was Team Zero with Jamie Thomas, if you remember those days. I was skating with them as though I was a professional, but I wasn't getting paid, right? So I'd still make videos and still, and I didn't have, shoes or boards or any kind of, merchandise deals or anything like that. But once you turn pro, then all those sorts of things start coming. And then, if you're really good, then you turn into, Tony Hawk or Bam Margera or, one of those household names. But I suffered a career-ending injury about a week before I had heard rumors that I was going to be extended a contract. And that was very, very devastating to me, because I had quite a bit invested in this whole skateboarding career, professional athletic career. And I basically just kind of sat around my house and played video games for a year, kind of wallowing in my own depression there. I kind of got the bug in my head, like, I want to do something. I want to do something different and create something. So I was convinced at the time, and I know this is going to sound crazy to people on the call, I was convinced that there was this new thing called the World Wide Web that came out. I was convinced that this was going to be big and that people would buy books online. I know, completely nuts. So I created this thing called a website. Nobody knew what that was. That was back when people still read http:// when they gave you a URL. So I started an online retailer or an online publishing company that specialized in health books, because I thought, what better thing to market to people than a health book, something about your health, how to improve your health. And I was a fit guy at the time, minus the whole ankle injury thing. And I didn't sell a single book. I even resorted to hijacking AOL chat rooms, if you remember those, or Prodigy, CompuServe chat rooms back in the day. And I would promote my stuff in the chat rooms, and people would just tell me to scram. And I didn't sell a single book, and I sunk literally every dime I had into developing the site and buying the inventory. And it was a total catastrophe. My girlfriend at the time, she was headed off to college. I think she was at Ball State studying genetic engineering and physics. And she convinced me that, hey, you know what, maybe you should take a class or something to learn what you're doing, because clearly you have no idea. And so I did. I enrolled at a small community college called Holy Cross in South Bend, Indiana. That's where I grew up. And took courses there. I found teachers, an English teacher who appreciated my writing skills and encouraged me to compete in writing competitions. And I found brains I didn't know I had, and I was so successful that I just transferred into Notre Dame during my third semester, and spent another 4 or 5 years there, and graduated magna cum laude. But my first venture was a failure, and I guess I'm kind of getting off course here on your original question. What I usually say to people is, before you experience any success, you will experience failure. And the saying that I always like to say is, adversity is the price of wisdom, and no one can teach you wisdom, right? So wisdom kind of falls into something that my father said to me when I was in college. I was complaining about not being able to find a job that appreciated my intellect. I was a young kid, and no one wanted to hire me for my brain. They just wanted me for my hands. It was all manual labor type stuff. And he said something to me that stuck with me for the rest of my life. He said, son, there's a lot of things that you don't understand about this world yet. He said, hunker down, learn to play the game, get wise, and then when you're ready, do what you were born to do. And that was actually the last thing he ever said to me. He passed away a few weeks later and I was kind of obviously stricken with sadness there as a result of that. But those, the last teachings, advice of a father to a son, has a way of being burned into your soul. It's a mantra that I've had my entire life now, and I realize, looking back, that the reason that I failed at my online publishing company was not because of my competition. It was a small startup. You guys probably never heard of Amazon.com. It was because I was not wise. I was inexperienced. And I was doing all the things technically correct, but there's something more to it than that. And I get that now as an older man. I like to think a much wiser man.
We'll be right back with the rest of Troy's story, but first, a reminder that the Influential You podcast is brought to you by Thrive, Influential You's self-guided training. Thrive is a professional self-development program that lets you learn at your own pace. Thrive members enjoy weekly live e-coaching sessions and an ever-expanding library of exclusive video lessons taught by our faculty, consultants, and industry experts. Sign up today and use promo code 30days to get a Thrive self-guided training subscription free for 30 days. That's coupon code 30DAYS. For links or to find out more, you can click the link in the show notes for this podcast, or in the USA or Canada, you can text the word Thrive to 805-262-9008, and we'll send you the registration link right to your mobile phone. Again, text the word Thrive to 805-262-9008. You can cancel at any time. Now, back to the interview.
It's quite clear you have general and specialized knowledge in what you do now. Specialized knowledge that's sort of ridiculous. I don't think you and I could even talk about it in the same room. My eyes would just cross. But You certainly have that, in your study here. I'm imagining what people are now wondering, about how did he do this, or how did he accomplish what he's accomplished now? You stood up at a conference, one of them, and you stood up when Kirkland was doing sort of a survey of how much money people make on I think it was a monthly basis or something. And you stood up in the 30,000 a month category at that time. And I know for some people in the room, their brain exploded. It's like, what? How does one do that? What is it you do? How do you do that? So here you are. You got the specialized knowledge, the general knowledge is obvious. Fitness, hello, fit. As you started to study with this, what did you discover about your own naivete, and how did it help you accomplish what you have now?
Well, I think the main thing was making me confront the reality of my chief aims, right? And and you're absolutely right. At the time, $30,000 a month. I mean, there's a lot of people who don't do that in a year. When you have that kind of success at my age, the age that I started to get that, I was around, I think, in my late 20s when I started making real money. And I had no idea what to do with it. And my naivete was really centered around this narrative that if I'm this successful now, wait till you see me at 40. And oh boy, I'm going to knock the socks off. Sky's the limit. It was such bullshit. I was just throwing money around, and I didn't care because I had so much of it. And I didn't know how to really handle my success. And it was really an amateur thing to do. And a really, really kind of stupid thing to do. I'm very fortunate that I found influence ecology, because I think had I not confronted the reality of my aims, I would probably be in a much worse position today. Probably worse than where I was in my late 20s. Even I would even speculate. There was a bit of a fantasy lifestyle that I was living in, and boy, doing, I think it was, what was it, study paper 7 in FOT really just kind of really twisted it, really stuck it and twisted it and broke it off for me.
Yeah.
Kind of made me wake up to the reality and kind of get my stuff together there.
I love that you're saying this, because, study paper 7 and study paper 8 and the fundamentals of transaction program are really about thinking accurately about those aims for work, money, career, health, and many other aims. And it's our experience that as people go through the first couple of study papers in fundamentals, that they take an accurate assessment. They often find out they're never going to accomplish what they hope to. They're never going to be able to make the kind of money that they hope to, or that if they continue to do what they do, they're going to labor themselves to death, and so on. And that's the typical for you. As you did that work, it's clear that you started to articulate your aims, but where did you find that you weren't thinking accurately? Was it just simply about, blowing the money, or was there something else about that?
Well, I think I think it was work, money, and career. Those three together that really kind of opened me up to what I was missing out on. And money being, I wasn't saving anything. I had no plan for the future whatsoever, other than get rich or die trying. Right? That was my plan. It's funny how history repeats itself. It's very, very similar to when I was a child and asking my father for a motorcycle. What do you mean? What's my plan? My plan was to ask you, kind of thing. I guess I was still doing that all those years later. But career as well, and I wasn't really taking advantage of that. And in hindsight now, I realize I used to be one of those guys that poo-pooed making professional connections. And they call them networking. I hate using that term networking because it sounds so superficial. But running into people who you encounter throughout your career, through your work and what you do for a living, tends to, you tend to accumulate a lot of good people if you work at it. Or you could just hang out with the same guys or gals around the office coffee pot for 20 years and not really have a network of people that you can draw upon. I was fortunate that I was forced to do that, just by virtue of the type of work I was doing. And when time came for me to take the leap of faith, I discovered by complete accident that I had an ecology, and it caught me. And the day I quit my job from PwC, it was one of those things. I love telling the story too. It was 6 or 7 years into PwC, and I was very successful there. I had made manager at the time. I was up for director, and I was the youngest manager there. And I was at that point in my career where you really kind of have to make a choice if you want to pursue the partnership at a firm like that, or you peel off and do something else. And I knew that, and I was undecided. I sat in consideration for that for a long time. In fact, I gave myself 2 years to think about it. So I put a notice in my BlackBerry. Remember those two? I put a calendar entry in my BlackBerry, and I gave myself 2 years to think about this decision, because that's about when I would really need to have a serious answer for it. And 2 years later, it was January 4th, 2010. I walked into my office, and at 8:30 in the morning, my BlackBerry buzzed, and I thought, who the heck is calling me at 8:30 in the morning? No one's up this early. I'm the only one in my crew that keeps normal hours. And I looked at it, and my BlackBerry said, "Sure, get off the pot." And I knew exactly what that was. It was the notification I put in there 2 years earlier. And I realized something in that moment. I realized that these 2 years had passed, and I had not given this a single moment of thought. I had just kind of existed and continued more of the same. I was literally and figuratively in the same place. I had nothing to show for it. So I put my BlackBerry down, opened my laptop, and wrote my resignation letter. And I quit that day. I had no plan. I had no money, no job, no nothing. I just up and quit out of the blue, which was really stupid. And I know this sounds very romantic and Hollywood-ish, but don't do this. Do not do that.
Yeah, I was going to say, thanks. Don't do that.
Don't do it. And a couple hours later, I got a call from an old friend of mine who I hadn't seen in several years, who is now an executive at a very prominent Fortune 50 company, no less. He said, "I heard you quit." I said, "What are you talking about, Joe? How did you hear this?" Like I practically just hit send on my email. He said, "Oh, word travels around fast." He says, "What are you going to do?" I said, "You know what? I don't really have a plan at all. I don't have a job, nothing." He said, "Well, until you figure that out, why don't you come and work for me? You can be an independent contractor for me until you figure out what you want to do, and that'll help bridge the gap between now and whatever your future may hold." And I said, "Sure, Jeff, but I got to warn you, I'm not cheap." He said, "All right, give me a rate." And I named him a rate that was so outrageous. I was joking. I was making a joke. I expected him to laugh. And he said, "Sure, can you start on Monday?" And I realized what I had done. I had quit my job at 8:30. By noon, I had doubled my income. So that was the genesis of what is now Level 9, the consulting firm. I started my own firm, partnered up with other people, and I realized that I had taken a leap of faith, a very naive leap of faith, and I was lucky to have an ecology that was in a position to catch me. And they caught me, and I just haven't looked back since then. I realized something when I was writing that resignation letter. Those words that my father, the last words that he's told me, kind of stuck in my mind. And I thought, you know what? I've learned to play the game. I have hunkered down, and I am wise or wiser. And I think this might be what I was intended to do my entire life.
All right. Well, I love listening to Troy's journey. In fact, there's so much more that we could share with you. Maybe we'll do that at another time. We wanted to, as I said, give you access to a portion of our webinar led in October of 2015 by co-founder Kirkland Tibbels. This webinar is a focused lecture for our membership on the specialized study that Kirkland began almost 30 years ago, and it's the foundation for the curriculum of influence ecology. And in each podcast, we'll feature what I call a talk, a takeaway that we want to give you, a way to listen in to our webinars and our live conferences. In this talk, he outlines the fundamental background that underlies the specialized knowledge enjoyed by members around the world. In it, you'll start to hear for yourself why Troy Frost and so many others are thriving. If you're around us for any length of time, you'll hear us say that our methodology has you come face to face with the behavior, the practices, and the naivete that has kept you from fully satisfying your work, career, and financial aims. We find that when people forget this fundamental background, they simply don't do as well as others who embody this knowledge.
All right, let's jump into the fundamental background. What do we mean when we say that we are biological? Biological, well, all that entails. John Dewey goes into a description of the creature that we are in the environments where we dwell and attempt to survive and to satisfy our conditions of life. And he uses this term biological to represent all things that are physiological, psychological, and otherwise associated with being a human being, this creature that we are. What we tend to stress in our study is that human beings are creatures with a brain, and we talk a great deal about what it means to be a creature with a brain. Those of us creatures on this particular planet who have brains because we move. We study in the Fundamentals of Transaction program this little creature called the sea squirt. The sea squirt is a creature with a brain, and the reason that it has a brain is because it moves. But it doesn't move for long. The purpose of that brain is to get it located to a spot where it can attach itself forever. And the first thing that the sea squirt does the minute that it attaches itself to its permanent location is it eats its brain. Why? Because it needs it no longer. So creatures that move require a system to navigate, to order, to understand, and to exist in an environment. That's what we mean when we say that we are biological. We're a creature with a brain that's moving around in this particular environment, and we mean the natural, planetary environment where we find ourselves, but we also mean that we remain biological even inside the constraints and the constructs that we have created socially, and the physical constructs that we have found ourselves and we place ourselves so that we can survive. We are biological. We are, and as a fundamental background, the first place that we go, and we want to recognize for so many reasons that we are biological, is because so many times people forget this. People forget, they become immune to and indifferent to the fact that human beings are a creature. We're going to talk about this at length here in a minute, but we want to stress that the most fundamental aspect of how we move around in the world is as a animal, as a creature, as a biology, in all that entails. And so that's the first place that we start in this fundamental background. The next place that we want to stress and to emphasize is that human beings are linguistic. What does that mean? Well, it means that we live in narrative. We live in language. We are given by language. We are a creature with a brain with a highly advanced linguistic system. We communicate, we navigate, we order our environments linguistically. In fact, much of who we are as a biology is given by how well we are able to navigate the linguistic environment where we find ourselves, how we locate ourselves in particular narratives. We are linguistic, and it's critical, urgent, important, stress as we must, this narrative component of our own biology. So we are biological and we are linguistic. And finally, fundamentally, we are creatures of reciprocation. We are social animals and we are reciprocal animals. We are the biology that we are, living in a world of language, in story and narrative, and we must do it together. A human being left alone will not do well and likely will not survive. We cannot survive alone. Even the most ambitious and knowledgeable wilderness scout, John, is going to have a really tough time out there alone. No human being, naked and up against the natural environment, is going to do well as a creature out there. In fact, we're a pretty mediocre physiology. We don't do well against sharks alone. We don't do well against the natural elements. It isn't long, even though you can watch television shows where there's 400 crew members following one guy around, and he demonstrates how he can live alone, and God knows all the things that are going on. You know, that particular narrative is a demonstration of the kind of naivete that people move around with all the time in the marketplace and in our environments. Human beings don't do well alone. We don't survive alone, and we certainly cannot thrive in our current environments alone. We must get help, and that's what we mean when we say we are transactional. We are reciprocal, co-constitutive element of our environments. We live in language, and fundamentally we are a biology, and we start there because these are the most avoidable kinds of aspects that human beings tend to relate to. They tend to avoid the kinds of narratives that they live in. They tend to excuse themselves from the fact that they are biological, and they rarely recognize that they are transactional. We are social animals. What does that mean? That means that we cannot exist alone. It means that we are given by the social apparatus in which we attempt to satisfy our most basic wants and needs in life. We're reciprocal. We are, as Adam Smith calls it, the exchange animal. We are required by the very nature of our existence, the way that human beings have set up our structures. We are required to exchange. And how we reciprocate is imperative. How we reciprocate is critical if we are going to live in a kind of existence that is comfortable. We are reciprocal, and we are conditional. Human beings are highly conditioned creatures. We are conditional. We don't like to admit it. John, I was in Denver, and we got into a conversation at the open training session there about just how conditional we really are. What I mean when I say we're conditional is that we move around in certain narratives and conditions of life. We exist in and we are concerned about conditions. And as Maslow teaches us in the development of human motivation, as we begin to mature, we begin to recognize new needs and wants as more fundamental and basic needs and wants are satisfied. So in other words, as our health is satisfied, we have more access to other kinds of activity. As we gain more in terms of our relationship, we begin to expand our needs and wants. And as those needs and wants are expanded, other needs and wants begin to emerge in what we call higher conditions of life. Human beings are highly conditional. And we produce narratives, and we think in terms of narratives on a conditional basis.
If you'd like to know more about us, go to influentialyou.global and explore our courses, consulting, and conferences. We offer a 4-year curriculum for those seeking a truly advanced experience. However, if you're new to Influential You, I recommend you start with Thrive. It's our self-guided training. Thrive is a self-guided program that allows you to learn at your own pace. Thrive members enjoy weekly live e-coaching sessions and an ever-expanding library of exclusive video lessons with our faculty, thought leaders, and industry experts. You'll gain proven proprietary tools to accurately assess your career and develop a realistic strategy that helps you achieve your aims faster. Your membership also includes chat access to faculty, plus discounts to our transformative conferences. Sign up today and use promo code 30days for a free 30-day test drive of Influential You's Thrive program. That code, 30DAYS, and you may cancel at any time. Thank you so much for listening today. You'll find new episodes on our website, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, so you can easily share this episode with others. You can also subscribe on Spotify, Stitcher, or any place that you listen to quality podcasts. Next week on the Influential You podcast, we have John Bajent and how he was able to reinvent his career after a massive earthquake hit New Zealand. He went through all of this later in his professional life, and because of the principles he learned at Influential You, he was able to thrive. I hope you'll join us. You may check out our show notes for links to connect with our guests, plus links to websites, books, or special downloads that we may have talked about on today's episode. This season's podcasts were made possible by the Influential You staff, faculty, and our wonderful members all around the world, with a special thanks to our executive producer, Tyson Crandall, Joey Anderley, our in-studio producer. Thank you, Joey. With contributions from John Patterson, Michael Teehee, Daryl Anderley, Paul West, and Liz Smiley, and a special thanks to our guest, Troy Frost. The Influential You podcast is produced in Ventura, California, and this episode was originally recorded in August of 2016. The podcast theme is by Chris Standring, entitled Fast Train to Everywhere. And if you haven't yet offered a rating or review, I ask that you take a moment, go to your podcast app, and let us know what you think. This helps us more than you know. We'll see you next time on the Influential You podcast.